So with that being said, I decided that this week we would talk about a topic that was of a more auditory nature, which is being the songs and poems of both the Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings series as a whole. Now, this is more my forte, being the musically inclined, along with Brock, who is not a part of our production. But I still wanted to maybe work off of you guys on a couple of the different ways that song and verse are used in each series to help with the world building, as well as just some of the symbolism that is happening to our characters at any given point.
You know who was a magician?
Who?
Rhaegar Targaryen.
He was. He absolutely was.
Beautiful singer.
Beautiful singer.
That's what they tell us.
Those are the stories that we hear, is that back when he was the prince in King's Landing, he would go down and sing songs for the people down in Flea Bottom, and then they would leave him coins and he would give them out to people, or he would go and get incredibly drunk with Sir Barristan in the Fold, as it was said. But unfortunately, I don't actually know any of the songs he would sing. I could hazard a guess as to some of them, you know, The Dance of the Dragons, possibly even The Reigns of Castamere at the time.
I bet some of them were definitely in High Valyrian and his mother tongue as
well. And from what I've read, I don't recall any of them, and obviously they would be in High Valyrian anyway.
Right, sure.
But I'm sure that there were plenty of those.
What's the and I guess this is a sidetrack point, but the common tongue, is there an actual name for that?
There isn't actually a language.
Because obviously it's English
to us.
Is there like a?
It's literally just referred to as the common tongue.
Common tongue, and then you have High Valyrian and others, right? That kind of have their own selections.
Dothraki, High Valyrian, just to name a couple of the languages that we have, which also I don't know of any songs that were in Dothraki.
I bet the Dothraki songs were real bangers, though. Real, Rage Cage type stuff.
I was going to say, some Rammstein kind of stuff with that, hard Dothraki guttural sound. You got all
Horse
that.
hooves for drum sort of thing.
What do you think, Ryan? You know?
For the Dothraki specifically?
Just any of the Game of Thrones.
What kind of songs do you think pops?
Well, I'd be very interested in the sea shanties that
definitely
the drowned gods worshippers would probably sing.
Right.
Gotta keep that.
Always makes me wonder about one song that is and one of the habits that they have in the show is they use some of these songs as end credits stingers. One of them is the It's Always Summer Under the Sea, which is a song that in the books, Patchface, who is a companion of Shireen Baratheon, you aren't familiar with him quite yet because you haven't gotten there in the books, but Shireen actually sings it in the show, and it's always summer under the sea, and it's in the context of the books, it's a little bit creepier, and a lot of people have theories about Patchface actually being a disciple of the drowned god. Just to give Ryan a little bit of that good old drowned god goodness in there. But the main reason I want to talk about some of these things is so in both of the series, we have these songs that are both important to the worlds, but also to the story. They're symbolic from our perspective as the readers and viewers of each of these worlds. One of my personal favorites for Game of Thrones in particular is The Reigns of Castamere. Because its song is so perfectly interwoven into the narrative of what is happening in the current day, as well as it provides such a great backstory as to why it was written in the first place. Ryan, being a little bit more familiar with a lot of the book stuff, do you remember exactly what was the cause of The Reigns of Castamere to be written?
I cannot seem to remember.
That's okay. But so with that being said, Tywin Lannister, who is the head of House Lannister at the beginning of the series, is a very, very firm leader of his house. His father before him, Tytos Lannister, was a weak man by Tywin's own admission. He constantly gave away their money and would never call people on their debts, would never even charge them interest. And if they, got cozy enough with him, he would honestly let most of their debts just fall by the wayside. Oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. But the second richest house in Westeros was House Rayne, spelled Reyne. So, House Rayne also had a lion as their crest. And they were getting a little bit tired of being in the Lannister shadows. They thought, why can't we be the top house anymore? And they were bannermen of the Lannisters, but they were trying to overthrow the Lannisters at one point, which Tywin decided that he was going to call them on their debts, first off. To which, there was this whole hubbub with Tytos Lannister and all this stuff. And eventually it came to a head where Tywin, unbeknownst to his father, went to House Rayne. And they were actually allied with, I believe it was House Tarbeck. And basically he trapped them inside and he diverted the river so that it flooded the entire castle.
I remember the story.
Which eventually destroyed House Rayne and left them completely in ruin. He basically just committed a genocide against one of his own bannermen.
Are you going to talk about the lyrics and how that coincides with the story?
Absolutely. So the lyrics of that, and I'm just going to pull them up here so I make sure that I am saying these right. So it goes, the way it's sang in the show is you have, and who are you, the proud lord said, that I must bow so low. And so this is speaking from the point of view of House Rayne, who they are both lions in this case. Right. I'm only a cat of a different coat. It's the only life I know, basically. Is why should we be subservient to you? We are both lions, so I am going to take my place and I'm going to fight back against you.
It's a real Lion King, Mufasa
absolutely.
kind of story.
Absolutely.
It's cool.
Get some of that Hamlet vibe going in there. Heck yeah. Only a cat of a different coat. It's the only truth I know. And so he spoke, that Lord of Castamere. Now the rains weep o'er his halls. And I love that one because they were the rains, but now all that is just rainwater.
Right.
Rainwater
diverted.
Yeah. Rainwater drowned most of the house down below. And then now the ruined hall, nothing enters, nothing goes, just rain.
It's an interesting callback and parallel as well to the deaths of Robb Stark, and not necessarily the rains, but the blood and the wine that spilled and covered and ruined the hall.
No, and that's the whole point. Is so in the lore, after this absolute destruction of two houses that were bannermen to House Lannister, this song was written to just basically show the ferocity, and it's not a ferocious song by any means. It's quite fun, and most Lannisters in the show sing it as a drinking song. Yeah. But when you really get into the meaning of it, it's horrifying.
Also, when you slow it down and play it over a foreboding and tension-filled room.
And so within the lore, after this song was written, if ever there was a time that somebody was getting uppity to House Lannister, all it was send a lute player to play the Reigns of Castamere, and most of the time they'll just get right back into line.
Yeah. And you go ahead, actually.
How appropriate that in the show and in the books that song would coincide and be used for what Tywin and House Frey we're hoping would be the end of House Stark, or at least their rebellious nature and tendencies. When that violin starts playing in the Reigns of Castamere, it's just, something's wrong.
Do we ever, and this is a genuine question, do we ever hear Reigns of Castamere after that point?
So in the show, its melody is used throughout Lannister themes. If you paid attention during Cersei's coronation, you hear little bits of them, and then that kind of melded with her new like royal theme that she kind of had for that. And then its final playing was probably, I want to say there was a leitmotif of it within the scene where Tyrion finds Jaime and Cersei's bodies in the Red Keep. And how appropriate that leitmotif of that song be used in that moment. And this is just like the music nerd in me liking it, because now this great house itself has fallen into ruin. And I don't suspect it will ever rise again unless in future endeavors somehow Tyrion,
If there was a person to be left to that house, Tyrion would be the one, I think, to revive it in some capacity. To greatness.
But he's got a lot of work to do rebuilding, a burned down city.
And book him and and series him are two very different.
We'll see how much.
Because I don't believe he'll be disrespected in such a way in the books. I think his ending will be much.
We'll see.
More heroic than I guess what happened in the actual.
You underestimate it, because actually Tyrion in the show is portrayed a lot more of your heroic style. He's not afraid to get down and dirty. In the books, his killing of Shay is actually.
It was a turning point. Wasn't it?
It was a turning point for him, absolutely.
Which we'll still see with the next two books if that continues to build.
So we'll see how it goes, how his time with Daenerys, should he ever reach her in the books, happen. But that's that for that one. Another one that I really loved in the show.
We're still talking Game of Thrones, by the way.
Yes.
Talking about Jenny Oldstones.
So actually, I'm gonna go with the Bear and the Maiden Fair before I get to Jenny's song.
Do it too.
So with the Bear and the Maiden Fair, the reason it's so interesting to me is it was kind of this whiplash I felt the first time. Well, actually, when there was a modern, so we have the Reigns of Castamere, which the first time we hear it like fully is it's sung by the National at the end of the Battle of Blackwater. We hear snippets of the Bear and the Maiden Fair after Jaime and Brienne are captured early in season 3 by I want to say it was Locke and his men. This would have been Vargo Hoat in the books,
serving under
Roose Bolton.
Boltons.
But so they're singing little bits and pieces of the Bear and the Maiden Fair, walking along, and then the most jarring version of it to me, I actually kind of laughed out loud because it was such a serious scene to immediately be turned around. So I believe it was at the end of episode 3 of that season where Jaime is trying to save Brienne from being, yeah, I'm not going to say the word, but invaded by assaulting, assault from Roose Bolton's men. And he's trying to talk his way out of it. Oh, if you do this for me, my father will do this, my father this, my father that. And Locke just, he can't deal with it anymore. My father, you always use daddy to do all these things and you're so great and blah, blah, blah. Well, what happens if I do this? And he just chops off Jaime's hand. Jaime screams, and then it cuts to black, and it's like this country folk rock version of the Bear and the Maiden Fair. And literally the first time I ever watched that, it was such a shock to me that I just burst out laughing. I was like, what just happened?
Yeah.
But so the significance of that song in the books as well as in the show is it reflects a lot of different relationships between some of the characters. So the funny thing is, the Maiden Fair in this situation is actually Jaime, and Brienne's more the bear. But other characters who kind of go with the archetype of what the lyrics are talking about are Sandor Clegane and Sansa Stark. Because Sansa, growing up, she had this idea of what a knight was. And it was somebody like Sir Loras Tyrell or Joffrey, what she viewed Joffrey to be until she realized, oh my gosh, he's a monster, he's beating me in front of his court. And in that case, the Hound, Sandor Clegane, is the one who kind of saves her from that in his own little ways of disobedience to Joffrey. And then lastly, more literal on this one, you have Jorah Mormont, whose Mormont's their sigil is a bear, and his maiden fair, which is Daenerys. And it's just kind of a cool relevance of those three different relationships and how they are. But yeah. Anything to add on that?
It's yeah, when that moment where he loses his hand and it cuts to that, because maybe you're still not a huge fan of Jaime at that moment, and so you're kind of rocking out to it a little bit, like
yeah.
Guess what you
Because
get.
at that point, Jaime hasn't even revealed his whole story to Brienne, so you're still kind of like, he's kind of a scumbag in his own ways. So
you're such a great sword fighter. No,
exactly. You're not really rooting for him at this point. So that was the other reason it was kind of a funny moment for me.
And outro songs have moments like that where it kind of makes the viewer kind of like sit back and think about what was just done there, because you take, and I keep bringing up the Red Wedding, but I'm going to one more time. The absolute, and it's the lack of music at the end of that one.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing.
No, there's nothing.
There's not a sound nor a whisper. They just leave
Basically,
you
the
in
last
blackness and
sound,
silence.
you heard was Catelyn Stark hitting the floor after her throat was slit.
It just goes to show like the severity of like the peace songs that can be dropped after certain episodes, and the absolute like, we understand what we've just done here, and we're not gonna follow with anything.
Which I think it's definitely a clever thing on their part. There are certain times in filmmaking and in TV show making where you have to let the scene speak for itself, and other times you might want to accentuate that with some music.
Yeah, and the audio can speak to even more of a story than the actual visuals, which is just, I think it's great. It's fun.
So let's before I get to Jenny's song, let's jump over to Lord of the Rings, where a lot more of the songs aren't necessarily played with music.
Right.
Maybe we, the audience, hear some music in the movies, but for the most part, these aren't necessarily like, you don't have traveling lutists or
Straight up a cappella.
Yeah, some of them are just straight up
poets.
The elves are singing, the poets are writing. One of my favorite, and a lot of people use this in quotes, and it's the "All that is gold does not glitter," which the full poem for that reads, "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost." That is a very common phrase that people use from that. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes, and this is the part that I love the most, from the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. And now that last four stanzas of that are most heard in Return of the King, when Arwen returns to Rivendell and basically tells Elrond, reforge the sword of Elendil and give it to Aragorn, which is basically his birthright, and it'll show that he has the power to become the King of Gondor. Fun fact about that poem, though, do you know who its author is in the books?
No, like in game, or like in
No.
game, in book, or like
in book. So that one is actually written by Bilbo. Bilbo.
That's a cool callback.
It is a very cool callback. He actually wrote that about Aragorn himself.
Back in the day, or more recent?
So it was at least whenever he met Aragorn. It is recited by Bilbo at the Council of Elrond in the books. And in the context of that, he tells Frodo that he'd written it many years ago when Aragorn had first revealed to Bilbo who he was, which obviously he was of the line of Numenor. He was the crowned king. He was the man who was meant to be king of Gondor. So I always found that one fun. That's more of a poem there.
Right.
Let me hop over to one that a lot more of us are a little bit more familiar with, which I wasn't aware of what it was originally in the books until I was doing the research for this episode. So we usually call it The Edge of Night, and it is a song that Pippin sings for Denethor, and most of you have heard it.
Sing me a song.
Sing me a song. It's an awful,
as he eats his tomatoes,
awful moment in Return of the King where Denethor is basically resigned to being a mad king style person. He doesn't care about his citizens, let alone his own son, as he sends them out on a suicide mission to reclaim Osgiliath.
How does that one start again?
So the verse that we hear is the final verses, which it begins, "Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread through shadow to the edge of night," which is where we get the title we know as the Edge of Night.
Do you know if that actor was actually the one singing it, or if that was a...
Oh, it was Billy Boyd.
Ah.
It was straight up Billy Boyd. Because the reason I know that, besides that, is when the Hobbit movies were coming out, he actually returned for the final Hobbit movie, and he did a new song. I'm forgetting the name of it, but I always enjoyed it quite immensely. As well, as much as I did not care much for the final Hobbit movie myself. But that song is at least a nice little ray of sunshine at the end.
Yeah.
But that song is actually called a walking song in the context of the books. And I'm trying to make sure that I am getting the right stuff here. From what I can understand in the books, it is first mentioned in the Fellowship of the Ring. And it seems like it's kind of along the same lines as... Like, think of it as in Fellowship of the Ring, the movie. So it talks about Bilbo, and actually Frodo is talking to Sam, and it's that moment where Sam stops and he says, "Oh, if I take another step, this is the furthest I'll ever be from home." And he says, "Oh, it's just like Bilbo always said, it's a dangerous business, walking out your door, yada yada." It's all that stuff there. And then I'm trying to make sure I get a good... And actually, I like that song as a quick jump back over to Jenny's song, because Jenny's song in Game of Thrones is very reminiscent of the same feelings I had listening to The Edge of Night in Return of the King.
It's very like...
It's very...
pre-battle,
calm before the
storm, but like very tension-y filled, and you get like
Absolutely.
this compilation of like everyone preparing for the battle, the final battle, if you will, which both of them seemingly are.
Yeah, seemingly.
Right.
The characters felt that they were.
Yeah, because like very much like, you know, the Night King could finish them all there, you know, same thing.
Or Sauron could finish
you know, the rebel.
And at this point, you know, Pippin, it's very clear in that scene in Return of the King that Pippin is giving into some despair there.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
and especially in the extended edition, he has a little bit more time to actually bond with Faramir before he is sent off to his death, supposedly. But you feel it. You feel it, and even Gandalf at the end, you see him just in a random courtyard somewhere after he's tried to dissuade Faramir from going out and ending his life so rashly. He just sits there, and there's nothing you can do.
Right.
And the ending of that scene is actually the forces of Sauron having repelled the small party. They are now bringing forth all of their siege weapons. Their full army is ready to start forming and begin their final attack against Minas Tirith. So hopping back over to Game of Thrones, Jenny of Oldstones, which I think is one of the... It takes place in one of the last really good episodes of Game of Thrones to me. Episode 2 of Season 8 was the last one that I truly, truly loved. And credit where credit is due, as much as I don't care for David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, I actually found out that the first two verses, High in the Halls of the Kings Who Are Gone, Jenny Would Dance With Their Ghosts, was the only part that was in the books. Everything else was written by D.B. Weiss. So I'll take back his bad writer credit just for a little bit on that one, because when you listen to the full lyrics of Jenny of Oldstones as it became known in the show versus where it was just Jenny's song in the books, because it's just mentioned by the ghost of Highheart. The full... I need to get the lyrics here. Thank you, my friend. So this one refers to Jenny of Oldstones, who is a character who was at. I'm trying to remember all the lore here. I want to say she died at Summer Hall when the Targaryens were trying to resurrect a dragon egg.
I feel like you were correct.
Yeah. With that one of the Targaryen kings at the time, I want to say it was Jaehaerys, tried to drink wildfire to help bring about
More dragons.
and more dragons, and it ended up setting Summerhall on fire, which coincidentally was Rhaegar's birthday. So he, being a person who believed in prophecies and all that, he was always shrouded by this shadow of this legacy that he felt
Was him or
his son to be.
He was going to, yeah.
Because Rhaegar, so the whole point with the prophecies and songs was that the Mad King Aerys was told at one point that Azor Ahai's reborn self would be coming from the line of him and Rhaella, his sister wife. So then Rhaegar thought he was the prophesied one until he kind of got to a point where he thought, no, the dragon needs to have 3 heads, all this stuff.
And depending where you fall on the Azor Ahai theories, right, it very well could have been his son, or, you know, his...
Or Daenerys is still within...
Or his sister.
Yeah, exactly.
That's your choice, really, at that point.
Straight up that. So...
Even though we all wanted to be... Baratheon, what's it, the other candidate, but he doesn't really...
Stannis Baratheon.
Stannis,
which
right.
so
Some people
obviously
Stannis.
Melisandre thinks that it is Stannis, but is
most are in agreement that it's probably he's the least likely suspect. But of the 3, like there's only 3. At least pulling from the actual series, the books obviously.
okay. So here it was. So Jenny of Oldstones, she was a peasant who won the heart of Prince Duncan Targaryen. And married him against the wishes of his father, King Aegon Targaryen, which most people who have read all the otto side books know him as Aeg from the Aeg and Dunk series.
Yes.
So Duncan the Tall was that. Trying to make sure I get this all correct.
If you don't, the comments will tear you apart.
I know. You just got to make sure that that's not the case.
Maybe.
Feel free to add.
I think the Targaryens have an interesting legacy too, because they bring like a whole lost civilization like with them in terms of like music and lore and legends, and it's a shame that we didn't get more Rhaegar.
And hopefully with the House of the Dragon series, we'll get a little bit more exploration of that.
Oh, we should.
So much more music and poems potentially and history.
Well, and that's the thing. Is so you have one of the other songs that was mentioned in the books was the Dance of the Dragons.
There was a Targaryen that prophesized the downfall of...
Dany's the Dreamer.
Yep.
Yeah. And so...
Her name was specifically meant to be like a prophet. She was prophetic through her dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she had a dream that the Targaryen line would fall, which ended up actually happening.
Okay. Quick retcon on my part.
Retcon.
Just so Prince Duncan, the one who Jenny married, died in the tragedy at Summer Hall. It is unrecorded what exactly happened to Jenny or whether or not she survived. So some people look at the Jenny of Oldstones as, you know, it talks about her dancing around in a ruin with the ghosts.
Like she's still, or because they don't know it happened.
Exactly.
Like
so maybe she's still dancing basically in the ruins of Summer Hall is the best way I could interpret it, especially. Ones who I loved her the most. Ones who've been gone for so very long, she couldn't remember their names, and this is just all the people who died.
So many died in that
Summer
tragedy.
Hall.
So
Couldn't remember their names. They spun her around on the damp old stone. Jenny of Oldstones comes from that, and spun away all her sorrow and pain. Which, after all of this tragedy that came from that and losing the person that she loved, there would be a lot of sorrow there. Excuse us for just a second. And she never wanted to leave. And so the reason I really like that song in the context of the show is so all of these folks are resigned to their fate.
Yep.
They know that the White Walkers are coming. They have holed up here to make their final stand. and they are spending this time drinking and reflecting on everything that led to them. This moment, all their sorrows and pain, everything before this, and they never wanted to leave. If this moment could last forever, they would make it last forever.
It is kind of more of a, it would be a question more than anything, but I do wonder, because Tyrion does go around the room and says, does anyone have a song? Anyone? And everyone says no until we hear Pod start singing, but I do wonder what everyone else's song choice would have been if not Pod, for Pod singing.
No, for sure. I wonder that too.
The only person I don't think would have actually sung is
Tormund.
Yeah, he was very resigned to the idea.
And from my research that I could find and comments, tell me if I'm wrong on this one, but I couldn't find any wildling songs.
Nope.
Nothing that I could.
I'm sure they
Which
have.
they
some
they
kind
no
of-
they have to have. I'm pretty sure that it talks about Mance Rayder being a songwriter.
Well, and
he
again,
likes-
he was
and he was
a crow
at-
turned.
Yeah.
wild.
And he talks about in the books that he was actually present at the feast for King Robert.
Oh.
So he
As a
snuck in.
representative
He
of the-
snuck in as a minstrel.
Oh.
So no,
He wasn't there as a representative of the.
No. No,
The Night
what
Watch.
the one? No, it was literally he had turned
time
against
ago.
the Night's Watch quite a time before that. He spent years trying to get the wildlings to
Does
stop
each
killing
house
each
kind
other.
of have a song kind of like the Reigns of Castamere that kind of represents them?
Let me just double check that,
Because I know they have themes. They definitely all have
and
themes.
that's the thing is, so within the lore of Game of Thrones, you have a lot more just random bards, people who are just part of the common folk writing songs about this.
There's just so many more
you-
characters in Game of
You
Thrones.
literally have in the books, you have a song about the Battle of Blackwater, which is written by Galeon of Cui, is the best way I'm going to pronounce that.
We also see a bard getting his tongue cut
Yes,
out
but
after-
that guy, honestly, you're singing that kind of song in front of Joffrey, you kind of deserve it.
Yeah, not a great idea.
Which actually, this song about the Battle of Blackwater is actually kind of interesting. I like the lyrics for it. The Dark Lord brooded high in his tower, in a castle as black as the night. And when you start realizing
Blood Stannis is
he's talking about Stannis.
It's kind of a cool way to describe him.
Black was his hair and black was his soul. He feasted on bloodlust and envy and filled his cup with spite. My brother once ruled 7 kingdoms, he said to his Harridan wife. I'll take what was his and make it all mine. Let his son feel the point of my knife. A brave young boy with hair of gold. And you kind of gag because we all know.
Gross. Flip those.
And the last part before, obviously, it cuts off. The Dark Lord assembled his legions. They gather around him like crows, and thirsty for blood, they boarded their ships.
True.
So
Really dope.
that's a dope little description. Obviously, history written by the victors in that moment.
Very clearly. Most songs.
I'm trying to think.
That's why Castamere is so prevalent, is because the Lannisters
Yeah,
have really been
absolutely.
winning since that.
Absolutely. But a lot of these other songs I'm coming across here as what's this one? Wolf in the Night and Wolves in the Hill.
It sounds like a
So
Stark
Wolves
type
in the
thing.
Hill is a song about the northern mountains and their inhabitants, the northern mountain clans. Their liege lords, the Starks of Winterfell, have often sent men into the mountains to settle feuds, which are remembered in songs as Wolves in the Hills.
Oh, like the mountain men that Tyrion meets?
No, I feel like the hills or like mountains that are in like the north, not necessarily the Vale.
But
It
mountain men.
It is possible.
Like people that aren't with a house or with like an actual city, or
Mhm.
like the people who like are in between, prey on travelers.
And then there was Wolf in the Night, which was a song written by a traveling bard about Robb Stark's victory at the Battle of Oxcross in the books. Which the best comparison, obviously, I don't think it's the same location, but if you remember, I believe it was in season 2. Robb Stark attacks in the night while you have those 2 Lannister guards who are just like freaking each other out. One of them farts on the other to scare him or whatever.
And then the wolf comes.
And then the wolf comes and mauls them. So that
takes
that,
them all out.
that would be
Great
my
scenes.
best comparison because Oxcross was in the books.
R.I.P. Grey Wind.
Poor Grey Wind.
You know, honestly, I think a show that really does bards and poetry and songs like as a part of their storytelling is Witcher, and I would love to see a what's that character's name?
Dandelion.
No. Well, in the
bard.
in the series.
Jaskier,
Yeah.
which is dandelions.
Sure.
It's the Swedish name or whatever
Yeah.
the heck it is.
I'd
but
love
yeah.
to see some type of character like that in like the new House of the Dragon type series.
Oh, absolutely.
I would love like a reoccurring bard that's
Mhm.
like writing songs and
For sure,
poems
I
and
would
things.
love that kind of stuff. Because yeah, Toss a Coin to Your Witcher was like an absolute
it was
bop
awesome.
real
when,
bop.
when that one came out. So
Yeah.
I would love some of that, and some of these other songs that are named on the list I'm looking at just to see more of them. Like I looked up this one, it was called The Cask of Ale, and it's a body song usually sung over ale. It's a favorite of King Robert. It doesn't have any of the lyrics, so it's just like it's mentioned in the books. I would love for them to explore some of these other ones.
Yeah, music is such an amazing way to like
It
really
brings-
diversify
It brings
your world
people
and
together, and it helps with the stories. And as much as I hate the lines at the end, stories are what brings
Yeah.
people together.
Yeah. And songs can really like tell you what part of the story, what part that side won, or which side clearly is taking the narrative and pushing it.
And it just adds passion.
Yeah.
And I mean that's how it is in the real world. Is songs just add passion to people's lives, whether
And
they're
accomplishments and the fall of some great people and those around them. Yeah, no, I think it well, they do a good job, both Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
but to prey on that even more I'd love to see that in future
For
iterations.
just kind of a quick.
You want to talk about the Hobbit songs?
Like which one are you thinking? Like the beginning of Return of the King?
No,
No, I think he
the
means
Hobbit.
like the Hobbit.
Oh
No.
no, absolutely, yeah. No, let's go over that.
Bilbo
because,
and all the dwarves coming to his home.
for context for a lot of you folks, I was excited when the Hobbit movies were announced, and I didn't even care that they were splitting in 3 because I thought that the Hobbit, from my point of view as a kid, was at least dense enough, plus all the stuff in the appendices that did happen, to do what they did with it. And with that being said, I was actually quite excited for some of these songs that I had read about when I was a kid. And so the first trailer for An Unexpected Journey that started with the Song of the Lonely Mountain.
Far over the misty mountains cold.
It got me more hyped
So
than
pumped.
anything else
So pumped.
in all of the trailers that came out for those movies.
And then you watch it.
Well, so Unexpected Journey, and like
The first one was great.
so my
I don't think they needed 3 movies.
my opinion on those, and I don't know if I've said it on this before, is that the Desolation of Smaug is my favorite. Unexpected Journey is just below that, and then Battle of Five Armies falls just so short of where my imagination was. So, because just context for both of you and for the viewers, listeners. The Battle of Five Armies in my head when I was reading The Hobbit was a bigger battle to me than Minas Tirith. To me.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
the
it was
way-
supposed to be 5 armies.
5 armies all against this goblin horde.
I enjoyed the warthogs.
It was cool to see that in the movie just because obviously like dwarves, armies crossing a long way of land.
The Hobbit is one book, right?
Yeah.
And at least when you look at Tolkien's original, like Fellowship, et cetera, like there's enough content for the huge movies that they are. Hobbit was, I mean, for the best moments, I'm glad they added so
Absolutely.
much, and they were great. But when you got to the final, 4 or 5 chapters of The Hobbit, and you had a whole nother, 2-3 hour movie that you had to fill, it's like, well, they really didn't have a choice if they wanted to fill it that much.
It drove me insane that Smaug died at the beginning of Battle of Five Armies.
I know.
Right, that should have been,
Because,
yeah.
like, don't get me wrong, it hooked you into the action, but I was just kind of like, really? Like, you have the Battle of Five Armies to hold this entire movie over. You could literally have it be like this 40 to an hour long segment of just like all these different things that are happening. And it just kind of turned into Legolas defying the laws of physics and an elf lady
Running out of
crying.
arrows. Finally.
finally. And an elf lady crying to Thranduil about, why does it hurt so much that I fell in love with a dwarf? Because it was real.
Right.
One of my least favorite lines of dialogue ever written.
But that's not to say that
That's
the
saying
songs,
something.
But the songs...
The songs were...
They
great.
got us into it, and
Um,
they showed us a story that was going to be deep and good and
the
exciting.
interesting thing, and it's just a weird tone thing, and I get it because The Hobbit was written at a time when Tolkien probably didn't know the full scope of what he was going for, because the ring at that point was just a trinket.
Right.
But as he wrote The Lord of the Rings, then all of a sudden he kind of retcons it
bigger
to...
and bigger.
And I was actually watching an interesting video about it, about how the Lord of the Rings is meant to be kind of written from Bilbo's perspective and Frodo's perspective, and they're unreliable narrators. And so Bilbo, like, literally it talks about how he writes about how he won the ring from Gollum in a
Battle of Riddles.
In a battle of riddles, which ultimately that wasn't the case.
No.
Yeah, he won his way out by tricking Gollum, but he'd already found the ring.
Yeah.
And he had taken it. So his good intentions were masked a little bit by that, and then that's when, you know, down the line Tolkien can kind of retcon it, like, oh well, Bilbo was just trying to make himself seem the hero here, and actually the ring was
Maybe it prefaces a little
Stolen.
bit what the
Absolutely.
ring does to your morals
Exactly.
and standards.
exactly.
Take the only thing that matters to this messed up little man in this cave.
Right.
That's the only thing
Yeah.
he loves. Besides eating
But so
goblins
the
and
tone
stuff.
difference between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is just interesting to me, because in the movies especially, it just feels like I like it because Blunt the Knives, Bend the Forks, the Song of the Lonely Mountain, like you get more of those songs that you heard or imagined what they had to sound like when you're reading the books as a kid. Because I don't know about you guys, but
The
that
first
was...
movie really put me in that kid mentality.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
going on an adventure.
I'm going on an adventure.
Goodbye,
and we're
Hobbiton.
seeing things that we didn't see in the original Lord of the Rings, like with the great big stone giants as they're trying to go through the Misty Mountains, and just it made Middle Earth
Can we talk about Goblin Town and that
mysterious. Oh my gosh!
Welcome to Goblin Town.
Down in Goblin Town.
Probably the ugliest but best singer in the entire
He was a
Hobbit movie.
pretty damn ugly goblin while we're at it too. Good grief, man!
What a great singer.
God, when Gandalf cuts him down later, I'm just like, I expected the fat to just like come out of him. Sorry for that visual, folks.
You've seen it.
You've seen it if you know what we're talking about.
Like that goblin's like Daft Punk. Like he wears the mask, but he sings great songs about Goblin Town.
Rip Daft Punk.
Rip Daft Punk.
R.I.P.
But I do like the speaking of just Blunt the Knives, Bend the Forks, I do like the spontaneity of it.
It's an odd tension. Like, don't break the plates, don't bend the things. Oh my gosh.
Bilbo played, like, one of the strong points of the movies was Martin Freeman as Bilbo. He does a great job. But just him being super, super, like, please don't break all my stuff. Oh, gosh. And if I recall, it's very interesting rewatching that scene recently. Was at this point Thorin's not even present. He doesn't come until
that's the rest of the
after
dwarves
this.
just being jovial.
Yeah,
and he comes through
and
with
then
his deep.
Thorin
and-
comes in and he's somber, and of course he's got this weight on his shoulders of I need to reclaim my legacy, my kingdom, yada yada.
And that's when you get, fall over.
Yeah. That's so lovely.
And then they all start singing it. Oh, it's just good.
It's a great moment.
Yeah.
And it really got me ready for the adventure that they were
It sold
about
me
to
on the
have.
other two movies that were going to come out.
Absolutely.
In
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's like,
that right there was enough to just I'm
Push
in.
in.
I'm watching the rest of this just because the promise of adventure is here.
Yeah.
And I love all the different versions that were made for it. There was another one that had more of the lyrics that are also included.
Right, more
so.
full selection.
I'm trying to think.
I mean, comparing the two worlds, I mean, I feel like
the songs of the
Game of Thrones, to me anyway, feels more about like the legacy of houses and the power dynamics that they establish, and like the deterrence that the songs themselves bring to other people trying to claim the spot of homes. Whereas the songs of Tolkien's more like, we're going on a great grand adventure, there's going to be scary things along the way. Like, it's more positive and uppity, but it can be deep and impactful in some parts, but more speaking to like this greater idea of like, I don't know, exploration and journeys versus, legacies, which is, I feel, more Game of Thrones.
Oh, absolutely. And Game of Thrones is very obsessed with legacy because of the society they live in, where it's very dependent on what are you leaving for your children? Are your children going to be stronger and better than you were? All of these things, and that's the lasting legacy of songs like The Rings of Castamere, is that Tywin left a legacy for himself of being a firm leader of his house and of his bannermen. Don't screw with Tywin Lannister or he will end you.
Yeah, it's like Game of Thrones is the songs and powers of the homes and the houses and the territories, whereas Lord of the Rings is very much the journey of leaving home and what's out there in the world, and I didn't even get into the Elvish songs just because I didn't feel like there was time. But the elves are always singing about nature and the world, and their songs are absolutely more filled with sorrow too, because as we talked about in like the religion and magic episodes, the elves know that their time is ending, so they are just filled with this sorrow, and that's why, particularly in the scene where Bilbo and Frodo see the Wood Elves migrating to the Grey Havens, the song that is singing, and we don't even hear the lyrics, and obviously if we did, they'd probably be in Elvish anyway. Right.
But you hear that sorrow coming out in that. And even Sam just says, I don't know why, it just makes me sad, because he doesn't even understand the Elvish that's being said, but he can feel it.
Right.
And being such a nature-bound civilization, so in tune...
Race of people, right.
Yeah. They definitely can affect their surroundings in that way.
What kind of songs orcs sing?
If you watched the animated version of the Return of the King, there's a one that's where there's a whip, there's a way, and it's just like the hard work of being an orc, where you just kind of, you're there for war, and
that's your whole life.
That's your whole life, basically.
You can sing about, before the war, after the war, during the war.
No, yeah. And that's just in the animated version of The Return of the King. I didn't find anything else in my research. I didn't want to really take that seriously, because also in that animated masterpiece was also Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom. Listen to that one sometime if you ever like it. I actually do appreciate the person they got to sing those. He's got a great voice, but I definitely don't take those versions of The Hobbit and Return of the King as seriously.
Did either of you play Shadow of Mordor?
I did not play.
Is there a good amount of songs? And
none.
I wouldn't
hardly
say so.
any.
From what I've seen, I wouldn't say so. He's obviously played.
Made to be an action game.
The
it was the same
are
thing.
Reminiscent, but that's about it.
Yeah.
The only thing that I can say from one Lord of the Rings game was in Battle for Middle-earth 2, and I'm sure in the first one as well, the character of Tom Bombadil does make an appearance as like a hero sometimes, and his whole thing is like he's constantly
Very
singing.
secretive, kind of like majestic character is Tom, isn't
Absolutely.
There's a bard goblin boss, isn't there?
There's this whole thing.
Isn't there one musical like general who's just? I mean,
there is, but they just.
It's not like anything deeper. It's just sort of like his motif, if you
They just kind of play drums.
But Tom Bombadil has a bunch of
there's a bunch
songs,
with
and they have meaning to them. I just don't want to go through them because there is a lot of text in just what I'm looking at right here.
If you guys want to know about Tom Bombadil and all
if you want me to do a full-on episode of Tom Bombadil, maybe we'll do that in the future. I'm not trying to snuff at him because I know a lot of fans, incling myself, were upset that he wasn't included in the 11 hours of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. But that's a lot of stuff you got to cover.
We'd have, if we want to talk about Tom, we have to find someone in the Game of Thrones world that's somewhat similar. Maybe Azor Ahai. Or maybe some legacy-driven, historical individual.
But I think
That about wraps
there
it up.
there are plenty of other songs, but there are just so many of them that are named, and some of them don't even have lyrics as of right now.
Yeah.
Just they're meant to be there for world building. They're meant to flesh out that these things happen. People at least are writing these things down, whether it be
Parts
in
that
poem,
we can't
song,
cover,
verse.
with a whole hour
Exactly.
of what flashbacks
But
or stories.
but it also just kind of makes the cultures and the world just seem more lived in, more full.
Yeah,
of
it's
life.
a nod to what we can't capture with film, but something we can capture with a bit of song.
And not to say that those don't affect us. Like I
No,
said,
greatly.
Jenny's song I actually have a bigger place in my heart for than Edge of Night at this point,
Yeah.
which I still find Lord of the Rings to be superior in almost every way to Game of Thrones now that both of them as film entities are finished. But there are moments that I still think are stronger, and Jenny's song is one moment that I find stronger in Game of Thrones, just because of the context. Now, I wish there had been a little bit more finality to this might be the last time any of these characters sing this song, and unfortunately, every single person in that room makes it out alive.
Yeah,
so it
they
just
all
kinda-
survive.
It kind of took away from the weight of that moment to me.
I'm not mad about most of them. I'm mad about Sam.
Oh yeah, well,
Help me! Help! He's just on the ground, just stabbing things.
You and I can get to that on our season 8 perspectives when we get there.
I don't know if we'll even do that one. I don't know if I want to do that one.
You don't wanna do that one?
I'll do
You
season 8
don't-
up to where I think it's good.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if we need to. Maybe we'll do a blooper episode of the last few, because I don't feel that those are built very well.
Well,
But
we won't bore you all with the details of that.
you can
so-
watch Perspectives for that content.
Yep. Anything else to add, Ryan? Anything other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, see, I'm more of a lore.
No, and that's fine.
Yeah.
This was just something I thought about one night and just literally felt like I like the music, I like the songs, I like the way that they can
And there's
flesh
a good,
out the lore.
a very good comparison too between them and what the music really stands to create in addition to the base worlds, and the differences that lie in between. That was very solid.
So, hopefully you found this episode interesting. Please hit that like button, subscribe, share with your friends, follow us on all of our social media, and we will see you all in the next episode. Take care, everybody.